Thank you all, and thank you to the panelists for being here today. This really is an issue that is so important for our time, but it's an issue that really is kind of taking a back seat these days, and it's something that I think we as conservatives need to do a better job of figuring out how to communicate in terms of urgency to the American people. So I'm excited here to have a conversation for the next 20 minutes or so with our panelists, and I'd like to toss the first question to Senator Perdue. Senator Perdue, as many of you know, is the only former Fortune 500 CEO in the Senate, so he understands numbers, he understands the kind of immensity of the importance of this issue. So I'd like to ask you, Senator, to just kind of try to frame how important the issue is and what the threats are that we're facing.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's why I ran, frankly. The debt crisis has been building for the last 15 to 20 years. It's the greatest threat to national security. I'll try to quantify it very briefly. We have $22 trillion of total public debt. It just clicked over that in the last 2 weeks, by the way. But more draconian than that is the fact that we have $130 trillion of future unfunded liabilities coming at us, primarily in Social Security, Medicare, pension benefits for federal employees, and the interest on the debt over the next 30 years. That's basically $1 million for every household in America. Now, put that in perspective. In 2000, the year 2000, we only had $6 trillion of debt on about a $12 trillion economy. So you can see the draconian growth in debt over the last 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Michi, we all know that one of the keys to winning this issue is being able to convince the next generation that this is something that's important, but it's really hard when you're talking about these massive numbers to make it matter, especially to young people. Talk about how you've talked about it in the past.
Well, I think it's really important for folks to understand. Obviously, the youth in America is really going to be the ones that are going to be saddled with all of these problems from a fiscal standpoint. As the debt continues to grow, it's not just the $22 trillion number that the senator mentioned. It's $180,000 per taxpayer in America that they owe on the debt today. And that kind of number, some homes can't even afford to put the next meal on the table, let alone $180,000 to pay for all the spending that has been out of control for many years.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the frustrations that I think many of the people in this room have, and that we all have as conservatives, is that we've had opportunities as a party, as the Republican Party, to tackle this and have failed to do so. I think back to 2010 and that huge election in 2010 with the Tea Party wave. And I remember the kind of contract with America that the party put forward going into that election. And the promise to the voter was that within the first 100 days we'll cut $100 billion in federal spending. Well, we got in and then we had some backtracking on that, and then the leadership decided, oh, let's not really cut the $100 billion. We're going to prorate it for the amount of days we've already been in session. It was insane. And that kind of stuff really frustrates and kind of, in my experience, has dispirited our activist base. How do we re-engage our activist base on the issue?
Well, let's talk about what we have accomplished since that watershed era, and I was a part of that.
Yep.
What we've done since then on discretionary spending, I'm sorry, my wife says I can bring any cocktail party to its knees talking about this, but if you'll bear with me for a minute, this is what we spend today. We raise about $2.2 trillion in federal tax revenue. We spend about $4.4 trillion all in. That's mandatory and discretionary spending. We also collect money into the trust funds for Social Security and Medicare. That's it. But the problem today is that our discretionary spending is about $1.3 to $1.4 trillion. Now that's fairly flat compared to 2009. Actually, we reduced spending in real dollars. The growth is in the mandatory side, the $3 trillion that does not get affected by the budget process. This is what we're trying to change. We do a budget up here that's a fraud. The budget we do in the United States federal government is, in Congress anyway, only deals with the $1.3 trillion of discretionary spending, not the mandatory spending, and that's where the problem is. The growth in the debt over the next 10 years is primarily in mandatory spending. It's so bad right now that we are borrowing more than our discretionary spending, which means that every dime we spend in our discretionary spending, that's military, VA, and all domestic programs, is fundamentally borrowed money. Right. It's so bad that we have these bilateral defense agreements with the rest of the world. One of them is South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. Taiwan's a good example. We have an agreement with Taiwan that says that if Taiwan is invaded by China, We have to go to Taiwan and help defend Taiwan against China, but to do that, we got to go to China and borrow the money to go to Taiwan and help defend Taiwan against China. Now, you can see how ludicrous that is, but that's the absolute truth. And that's why this crisis, people say all the time, well, when did the crisis start? When does it start? It started sometime about 5 to 10 years ago when we set off this path on mandatory spending.
Yeah. At Heritage Action, we have activists across the country, and one of the things that they really need and that we all want are things that we can support, tangible things that we can support to help make a difference. Senator Perdue has just introduced a resolution on the debt issue that I think is fantastic and is worth everybody taking a look at. I wonder if you'd take a few minutes just to kind of talk through what that does.
Well, I mean, a resolution doesn't do anything. It just tells the world, hey, we think this is important. And we want to vote on it because we believe that the national debt, this $22 trillion of debt, is the greatest threat to our national security. Those aren't my words. That's General Mattis, Admiral Rand. There are a number of military experts who have said for years that this growing debt is the greatest threat to national security. But it's also a great threat on our social institutions. We can't do the right things for our people anymore because of the size of this debt. And the more interest rates grow, the lower capability, well, the fewer capabilities we have to do that. Let me just show you how bad it is. Just in the last 2 years, the interest alone, while we've maintained some control on discretionary spending, interest rates have gone up $450 billion. Now that's unmanageable, and we're still in a low quartile of interest rates. If interest rates go back to their 30-year average, Tim, we will be spending $1 trillion on interest. That can't happen. We just physically can't do that.
Yeah, and so one of the things I think many of you, especially those of you who are on college campuses, when you start to talk about this issue, I'd imagine that the first thing that gets thrown back in your face is your liberal friends saying, well, look what's happened to the debt and deficit under this president. Look what's happened based on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Michi, why don't you take a crack at this and then Senator follow up? I'd love to hear kind of how you would encourage folks to respond to that.
Well, I think it's really important to understand two things when we talk about how to talk about this issue with young people. First of all, debt is a destabilizing force. People can plan for as much as they want when they're young, whether they want to plan for their future, whether it's a family, it's a business, it's a home. The debt can wipe out all of the planning in 1 minute. You just won't know. And the second thing that's important is we have to take the opportunity that we have to fix the problem. And the senator really brings up an interesting point. We are running out of capabilities to solve this issue as each day goes by. So we're on a path right now where there is a way out for Congress to be responsible, and the president has done some things to make sure that there is a way for spending policy from an administrative standpoint to be taken under control. But it's up to Congress. They have the tools, they have the authority, and if they don't take the opportunity, there isn't going to be a solution. One is going to be forced upon, and that's the young people who are going to suffer for that.
Yeah.
Well, let me take a stab at, the president's called this out in the first meeting that he had, that I was included in, the 2 weeks after he was inaugurated. He said, job one is growing the economy. Well, why do you need to grow the economy? Well, we need two reasons. One is to get people back to work, but also to have a long-term impact on the debt process. And so what we've done, there are 5 areas you have to work on. 3 are underway right now under President Trump. Now, we don't talk about it in a lot of ways, but this is the reality of what we're doing. In that first meeting, we said we had to grow the economy. Regulations, we pulled back over 2,000 regulations now in 2 years. Energy, we've released 2 mammoth energy projects such that today we're exporting more energy than we're importing as a country, the first time in 100 years. The third thing is growing the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the greatest economic turnaround in U.S. history. 5 million new jobs. We're growing the economy 100 basis points greater than the Obama administration. Oh, by the way, that was 8 years of the lowest economic growth in U.S. history. The next thing is we have low unemployment. We've got the lowest unemployment in 50 years, lowest African American, Asian, and Hispanic unemployment ever measured. So this is moving in the right direction. And what we found is if you do the right things of what we believe, you can get good results. So it's regulation, energy, taxes. We passed a historic tax bill that eliminated a repatriation tax bill, made our corporations competitive with the rest of the world. And last year alone, $1 trillion of unrepatriated U.S. profits came back into the economy. So collectively, we've freed up about $6 trillion to come back into this economy. The last thing is we passed a historic, bipartisan, by the way, bill to repeal the most onerous parts of Dodd-Frank. And I'm here to tell you, That has a profound impact on small banks. Now, here's what's coming. We are working on these three. The next one, the regulation, we are going to grow the economy. We've got to fix the budget process, cut redundant spending where we can, and a lot of that is in mandatory. But we've got to save Social Security and Medicare because these trust funds go to zero in 8 and 12 years respectively, and that's where most of the increases in the next 10 to 20 years is coming from those two social programs. And the last is we as conservatives have to finally start the debate about health care costs, not just the insurance. That's what the distraction of Obamacare was. We've been spending a decade talking about insurance. We need to start talking about the drivers of health care, which is causing Medicare to go up. And let me say this about the tax bill. The Democrats are lying about the tax bill. Yes, expenditures, the debt is up, but we've lowered the debt curve by $3 trillion because the economy is growing. You'll never read that in the liberal press. The next thing is I believe right now we've got an opportunity to continue that as the economy continues to grow. But the tax bill that we passed last year, they said, oh, it's going to add $1.7 trillion of new spending. Well, that's true, except that the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, says if you grow the economy 0.5%, and we're doing twice that, it more than pays for itself. And if you grow 100 basis points, which is 1 point, then you add $300 billion to the federal tax revenue, and we're seeing that today. So that's the lie of the left, that all this investment back into American productivity and American innovation is not working. Well, it is working. We've just got so much work to do, and most of it is on the mandatory expenditure side of our income statement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'd add one thing. I would say that if you have that kind of conversation, it is an opportunity to point out a very deep principle, a very deep philosophical difference than we have with the left, and that is that tax cuts were not the government's money in the first place. It was the people's money in the first place. So, and it's good. We need that kind of contrast. We need to have that kind of contrast. So I think we have an opportunity going forward here, especially given how crazy the left has gone on the issues that they're proposing, specifically with the Green New Deal proposal out there. I think we have an opportunity to contrast where they want to go in terms of debt and deficits and where conservatives want to go, and especially do that by highlighting how they would intend to pay for the Green New Deal. I think there's just been a few reports out lately about how they're going to do that. Senator, you want to talk through how they're going to do that? And then Michi, I think I want to hear how we should be talking about it as well.
Well, Jay Powell was in the Banking Committee hearing 2 days ago, and I asked him this question about how the left really proposes to pay for the Green Deal. The new Green Deal is with MMT. This is modern monetary theory. I don't know where they got that, but what their theory is that debt doesn't matter, and that to pay for the Green Deal, all you need to do is just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. This is such a naive thought in the world of debt that I can't even respond to it. I mean, this is so immature and naive that it just can't, there's no way it can work. And so what we are really up against is a very stark contrast between what we believe, economic opportunity for everybody, fiscal responsibility, limited government, and individual liberty. And it all ties back. If we get back to those principles, what President Trump's first 2 years have proven is getting back to that actually works. Look at the economic turnaround we have going right now. And if that continues for the next few years, we'll begin to further prove that what we believe in actually works.
Michi, thoughts?
Well, thank you. The senator's right, and I think we heard it this morning from Chairman Schlapp, and he was up on stage and he talked about how there's nothing new about the Green New Deal. These are the same failed ideas that have not worked for a long time, and the only thing that's different now is they're just not telling you how much they think it's going to cost because they know the number is so astronomical that nobody's going to believe it. And so I think we have to be very careful that when we are talking to folks, young folks, that they're not tantalized by the allure of all these things that they think that they want, and there's no cost in terms of how to pay for it. We have to give real solutions to the real problems of our debt and how that's impacting young people who want to start a business, who want to start a family, who want to be successful, who may want to be a Fortune 500 CEO one day. They have to have that chance, and they can't have it if they are not getting better solutions from our side and talking about it in a way that makes sense.
Let me add one thing
Sure,
to that.
yeah,
I agree 100%, and this is how draconian it is. The estimate, the conservative estimate of what the new Green Deal would cost us is $93 trillion over 10 years. That's $9 trillion a year. Put that in perspective. We only collect $2 trillion in all federal income tax revenue today. That's how draconian this is. There is no way America can go down that road.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we're working on at Heritage Action is trying to identify a conservative policy agenda going into 2020 that helps to keep the coalition of 2016 together. The political coalition that really President Trump discovered for the Republican Party is a coalition of suburban Republicans, it's a coalition of grassroots conservatives, and it's a coalition of working class Americans that in previous elections had voted for President Obama. And that was the real genius of the Trump campaign, I think, was to be able to bring that group into the fold. I think critical for us is figuring out how to communicate this issue to that specific segment. So, Senator Amici, if you're in front of a working class community in Georgia, how are you talking about this?
Senator?
Well, I do it every week. Constituents come up here. I go back to the states. It's the number one issue in my state. Georgia is the best place in the country in which to do business, rated by several relocation magazines. And what we see is if we don't deal with the debt, it affects our ability to do the things we do today. Pave roads, educate our children, manage health care. I mean, these are things that we take for granted in the United States. But when you have a $20 trillion debt and, oh, by the way, $22 trillion, and, oh, by the way, every year now you have a shortfall of $1 trillion, you lose the ability to do the right thing. Let me give you an example. Right now, farmers in my state were devastated by Hurricane Matthew. And we have been fooling around now for 4 months trying to get a disaster relief bill to them. I'm supportive of that. But here's the punchline, and this is where it hits every one of us in this room directly head on. And that is that every dime that we will send to aid those disasters that we're trying to help right now is borrowed money. And oh, by the way, we want to build readiness in our military. We're reinvesting in there, putting $80 billion more in our military this year. Guess what? Every dime we spend in our military today is borrowed money. This is where it hits you and me. And oh, by the way, you want to solve Social Security and Medicare? Well, some of that is going to affect us in this room. It is not, at this point, to Mishi's point, the later we wait to deal with this, the more draconian and more onerous it will be on the solution.
Absolutely.
You know, I would say when you look at people and you want to talk to them, no matter what side of the political spectrum they come from or the policy spectrum that they come from, you know, these are real numbers, and they keep growing, and we can't understand how big 22 trillion is in real time, but it keeps growing. And I think that it's important, whether it's a farmer in Georgia or, you know, someone in Tampa, Florida, where I'm from, who's starting a business, that all of these numbers in the end are going to only matter if Congress can do something, and if the president is able to work with Congress in a way to make sure that economic policies are expanding opportunities for Americans, you're going to see debt go down. Federal revenues are up. The government is getting money. So the problem is, what are we spending it on, and how do we make sure that we can do it in a way that's responsible?
Absolutely. So we've run out of time. I'd ask one parting thought from the senator. You've got a room full of activists here, and you're a leader in the Senate on this issue. What do you need from the activist community across this country?
Hold elected officials accountable. The number one driving force in the bubble here, I'm an outsider in the belly of the beast here. I believe in term limits. I ran and committed to only 2 terms. And I believe that you and I can have an impact on this town, but we have got to maintain accountability of the people that we put in office. Don't put people in office if they're not qualified. Don't keep people in office if they're not doing the job. It's no more complicated than that.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please thank the panelists.
Good job.
Good job.
Good job. Good job. I appreciate it.
Whoa.